Once upon a time, there was quite an ordinary girl who became a princess. It is a short story and very simple. She fell in love with a prince, and he, warmed by her affection, fell in love with her. When the world found out about it, everyone rejoiced. Loyal subjects in their thousands thronged the streets to cheer her on her wedding day. When the Lady Diana Spencer set off in the glass coach for St. Paul's Cathedral on the morning of the 29th of July, 1981, she was a girl scarcely out of her teens, whose only job had been to spend a few months looking after children in the kindergarten. She had delivered herself in public of just 432 words. Yet she left the cathedral, the third lady in the land, Princess of Wales and Queen in the making. At the wedding service, the Archbishop of Canterbury compared the transformation to a fairy tale, and nobody could seriously quarrel with that comparison. Some people, of course, think that the world should have outgrown princesses, but most of us like fairy tales. On July the 1st, 1961, here, at Park House near Sandringham in Norfolk, just a few hundred yards from the great house where the royal family have been coming for generations. So she was, quite literally, the girl next door to Queen Elizabeth II, and to Charles, Prince of Wales, who was already, in 1961, 12 years old. Christened Diana Frances in the Sandringham village church, she was the third daughter of John, Lord Althorp, heir to the earldom of Spencer. Her mother was Viscountess Althorp, née Frances Roche, who had been born in Park House also in January 1936, as King George V, grandfather of Queen Elizabeth II, lay dying over in Sandringham House itself. The story goes that the first thought of the widowed Queen Mary as she rose from her husband's deathbed was to inquire after the health of this newborn baby, destined, as events have turned out, to play her own role in the succession to the British throne. This tale was remembered when the engagement was announced of Lady Diana Spencer to the future King Charles III. And those who know about these things also made much of the blood connections that the lady had with King Charles II through a number of that king's many mistresses. Prince Charles made something of a joke of this in public. "I'm beginning to think," he said, "that she is more royal than I am." But the prince's biographer, Anthony Holden, says that this blood link did play a certain part in the prince's choice of a bride.
The one point that the Queen made to him was about the royal blood. She wants to keep the blood royal as pure as possible. And of course, Diana brings to the royal blood the only royal blood it lacks, that of the Stuart kings, so that their child, the next heir to the throne, will be the first heir to the throne in this country to be descended from every British monarch who had issue.
Queen Elizabeth II did not find out until later that her daughter-in-law-to-be is also related to Humphrey Bogart and to Rudolph Valentino, nor that she is the 15th cousin, once removed, of Mrs. Wallis Simpson, later Duchess of Windsor. These American connections come through her mother's side, from the Fermoy family, which, incidentally, shows a certain tendency towards twins, 4 pairs, 2 of them identical, like her mother's father and great-uncle. Still, through Lady Diana Spencer, the Fermoys have now added the blood of 8 United States presidents, including Franklin D. Roosevelt, to that of the British royal family. Her English connections include Oliver Cromwell, Lawrence of Arabia, and Sir Winston Spencer Churchill. And there is no doubt at all that she is a thoroughly English rose, which is one of the reasons, thinks her step-grandmother, the romantic novelist Barbara Cartland, why the great British public love her so.
They've longed for Prince Charles to have an English wife, which is exactly what he's got. And they were rather frightened that it would be pushed on to some obscure European royalty, which they went round to see if there was one. And they found, of course, that Lady Diana was not only a Spencer, which is one of the greatest families in our country, but I discovered when I was doing my book of romantic royal marriages that she was also of the Granvilles. Now, the Granvilles are one of the most exciting families, and even my son-in-law didn't realize this came into it, because they go right back to Duke Rollo, who produced 3 English kings, Ethelred the Unready, Edward the Confessor, and King Canute, and his grandson was William the Conqueror. And Lady Diana goes straight back in a line to that, so she couldn't be more English if she tried. And that, I think, appealed enormously to people all over the country, apart from the fact that they wanted Prince Charming to marry a young, pure English girl, and they were very frightened. Don't let's pull our punches. They were very, very frightened that, of course, it might be like the other Prince Charming, who was my generation, who married Mrs. Simpson. Instead of which, it all was perfect. It really was a fairy story.
It was not an entirely happy one. When her father, the future Earl Spencer and former equerry to the Queen, married Frances Roche in Westminster Abbey on the 1st of June, 1954, it was one of the great society weddings of the year. But in 1967, the couple separated. 2 years later, they were divorced, and after a year at a day school in King's Lynn, Diana Spencer went away to Riddlesworth Hall near Thetford in Norfolk. She had her guinea pig, Peanuts, for company, but she did not enjoy being sent away. She seemed to cope with homesickness and the pain that her parents' separation caused her by developing a certain detachment. Her family's nickname for her was Duchess. She divided her time in her holidays between her mother, who remarried to become the Honourable Mrs. Petersham Kidd, and her father, who in 1976 married Rain, the former Lady Lewisham and daughter of Barbara Cartland. Those who know the princess say that her troubled childhood contributed not a little to the realism and resilience with which she withstood the pressures attendant upon her most extraordinary courtship and marriage. And one of her closest friends is Caroline Pride, who met her at Westheath School in Kent, where Diana Spencer moved at the age of 12. After those school days, and shortly before the wedding in July 1981, Michael Barrett asked Caroline Pride for her personal assessment of the princess-to-be.
But she is a ray of sunshine. She's humorous, to the point of being outstandingly witty. She's great fun. She's the best friend you could have. And she's an incredibly generous person, and I think she'll do the job well.
One weekend in her final term at Westheath, where she was at school with Caroline Pride, Lady Diana Spencer got special permission to go home for the weekend. Her father was organizing a shoot at Althorpe, over the fields that had been fresh turned since the harvest. And the guest of honor at the shoot was Charles, Prince of Wales. It was November 1977, the moment when, the prince and princess now recollect, they first took serious notice of each other. Prince Charles recalls thinking that Lady Diana was a very jolly and amusing 16-year-old. Great fun, bouncy and full of life. She recalls that the prince, as she remembers him, was really pretty amazing. But she was only 16. She went to Switzerland for a period, to a finishing school, where she was homesick and spent much of her time writing letters home. She stayed only a term. It was not until she moved to London in the summer of 1979 to share a flat with some girlfriends in Earl's Court that she began to find her feet. She got work looking after young children, and when she wasn't working, she liked to relax window shopping in Chelsea and Knightsbridge, happy hunting ground of that peculiarly British archetype, the Sloane Ranger. America has the preppy, and Paris has the cesium girl. London has the Sloane Ranger, so named after Sloane Street, the thoroughfare that links the great emporia, like Harrods and Harvey Nichols, with the boutiques of the King's Road to the south. The Ranger's principal items of uniform are the silk square, knotted under the chin, the well-cut jacket, the shoulder bag, the pleated skirt, and low-heeled, expensive shoes. But Lady Diana Spencer never took greatly to this livery. She favored blue denim, and to this day, one Chelsea purveyor of blue jeans retains a souvenir of their most distinguished customer, who patronized them in her flat-sharing days. Another out-of-the-way place that the future princess liked to visit was a Battersea Street, just south of the River Thames. It is the home and headquarters of the designer Bill Pashley, whom she still patronizes.
How strongly is she now influencing world fashion?
I would say quite a lot, quite a lot. There's certainly a great deal of interest from all over the world, and I wasn't expecting to get write-ups in America, but it's happened. And they're just so anxious to know what she's going to wear.
Anthony Holden thinks that the princess will make her fashion influence felt in other ways as well.
I think that she could take over a role that princes of Wales have traditionally had, which is to be a leader of fashion. The last few, particularly, of course, Bertie and the prince who became the Duke of Windsor, were both well known for their rather outrageous clothes, canary socks and tartan trousers and the trilby hat and so on. And Prince Charles himself has not followed this tradition. He's actually a very boring and conservative dresser.
Life as a princess can have its problems, and one of them is how to go shopping in reasonable peace and quiet. So when the new Princess of Wales needs fresh clothes, she often comes here to Vogue House, just at the back of London's Regent Street. The magazine's fashion editors pick out for her the latest creations. The royal car drives discreetly into the garage at the back of the building, and then the princess goes up by lift to an upper room where the confections of London's designers are all waiting, hanging together on one rack, ready for her to browse through at her leisure. Apart from her wedding dress, the most famous outfit that the princess has worn is probably the low black strapless ball gown in which she appeared on her first evening engagement as fiancée to the Prince of Wales. Until that moment, people had been almost patronizing about her discreet and maidenly past. But the national shockwaves which rippled around that dress suggested that perhaps it was Britain that was old-fashioned. The Tatler described her display as the greatest moment of sexual theatre since Cinderella leapt out of clogs into glass slippers. And we are told that the Queen Mother took rather a dim view of such ostentation by a future queen. Perhaps Her Majesty had forgotten the furore she caused with some of the gowns she wore in 1937 on her state visit to Paris. Since her marriage, the new Princess of Wales has remained remarkably loyal to the shops and designers that used to dress her when she was Lady Diana Spencer. She still gets her clothes from Caroline Charles in Beauchamp Place, and of course from Harrods, which will surely soon be adding another royal warrant to its collection. Designers who dress her find their business is transformed as store buyers from every corner of the world flock to order copies of what the princess is wearing. Japanese ladies, it seems, just love to teeter around Tokyo in scaled-down princess kits. This one girl has proved to be the best thing to happen to the British fashion industry since Carnaby Street. 5'9½", with thick, glossy hair, sapphire blue eyes, and a grace that comes from tap dancing each morning. She sets off everything she wears with a style that is all her own.
I'm very struck by how photogenic she is, and it seems to me that this is one of the main qualities you need these days to be a member of the royal family. And I remember one day at the Times, it was actually Wimbledon in the summer of '81, around the time of the wedding. We laid out about, 20 photographs on a table to choose one for the front page of Lady Diana as she then was sitting in the royal box. And every single one was usable, where you or I would blink or look silly or look at our programs or something would be wrong. Even when in repose, her face was extremely beautiful and very photogenic.
The Lady Di look was the rage of 1981. Newspapers and magazines even ran features telling their readers how to look like Lady Di, though Prince Charles declared that none of the lookalikes were as good as the real thing. Girl who was less than stylish and good-looking. But a future Queen of England must possess other qualities: dignity, grace, composure. And Lady Diana Spencer proved that she possessed these qualities in abundance in the course of a quite extraordinary apprenticeship, which she had to serve as the press of the world laid siege to her flat in London. The onslaught began when a Fleet Street journalist, James Whittaker, spotted a green Wellington boot protruding from behind a tree on the riverbank at Balmoral, where Prince Charles was fishing in the autumn of 1980. Within hours, Whittaker had tracked down the identity of the Wellington boot's owner. Within days, he had tracked down her London address and telephone number. And from then onwards, day after day, James Whittaker kept watch on the flat where Lady Diana Spencer lived with her friends, Caroline Pride and 2 other girls.
Every morning it was a ritual, really, at about, well, 8 o'clock onwards. She would look for me to arrive in a car. I would often park just down here, and I never failed to get a wave from the window. She would look out of the kitchen window there, or the drawing room window down there, I think, and always she would look out, and there would be a wave every single morning on it.
I was going to ask you, how did she cope with you and eventually other pressmen, as some would say, hounding her all the time?
Yes, well, I think, well, she coped brilliantly, didn't she? And I think it was a great training for her for what was going to come to her, which she's now discovering, the pressures on her. It was easy for her. She didn't make any effort. She didn't make any mental way of how do I cope with this situation. That was her charm, I think, that she didn't deliberately think about it. She was and is, I don't know her now in the way that I did before, she is a charming, natural individual who I don't think had a nasty streak in her. She had never been unpleasant in her life. She had never been a rude person. She'd been, I think, beautifully brought up. And it was just easy for her to be. People sent her flowers because she was just a fabulous person. And chocolates, you know, she has this great craving for chocolates. And I mean, at one stage, after I'd sent her some flowers, she'd say, my place is looking like a greenhouse up there. It's wonderful. And there were times, of course, when she was not a happy person. Particularly towards the end, she felt the pressures on her, but it wasn't just pressures from Fleet Street, it was pressures from the whole of England, who were absolutely willing that girl to marry him, to marry the Prince of Wales. There wasn't anybody who didn't want her to, but there was tremendous pressure from everybody in the country to do this, and she just was a delightful person. The 3 girls that she shared with, Anne, Virginia, and Caroline, nobody could ask for greater friends and greater support than Diana received. Towards the end, when there was the most incredible pressure on her, those 3 girls supported her very well. Caroline was the person who, when Diana had to come out and run the gauntlet, so to speak, it was nearly always Caroline who was at her side. She would travel in the car with her, but they'd get in. It was great fun to see them because they'd come through this mob of photographers who'd be taking pictures. They'd get in the car and then they'd drive off, and the 2 would turn to each other and they would just roar with laughter at each other as they shot down the road and they'd turn. Oh, they were terrific friends to her, indeed.
It was a very light-hearted experience. We used to spend hours driving in the car, escaping from the press, in inverted commas, and that sort of nerve-wracking experience puts you on a high. I can't remember ever laughing so much. Even hopping on a bus once to escape them, sailing up Sloane Street on a number 22 bus and hopping off, leaving the pressmen on it. That was the best one, I think. But I think underneath, it really did hurt from time to time, and that behind closed doors, she took it very seriously, which is not any undue insult to them, I think. But certainly it was very tough for a young person, and presumably will continue to be so.
In previous centuries, would-be queens of England have had to gratify politicians, spies, and portrait painters dispatched by kings and princes to weigh up their qualities. In the 1980s, it is long lens photographers that the candidate must charm, and inquirers who practice the royal reporter's art of asking impertinent questions while walking rapidly backwards. It is true that she has been seen to shed a tear in public. Yet through the winter of 1980 and 1981, Lady Diana Spencer was not recorded as ever having uttered one indiscreet or ill-tempered word. She smiled, she giggled, she pursed her lips to look serious, then burst out laughing, and she succeeded in persuading all her persecutors, and most of the rest of the world, to fall thoroughly in love with her. She had undoubtedly learned the value of tact after her sister Sarah, herself a former girlfriend of Prince Charles, earned the disapproval of Buckingham Palace by talking too freely about the prince in an interview that she gave to a woman's magazine. The prince's honorary grandfather, Lord Mountbatten, once forecast that when Prince Charles did marry, then he would woo the girl quietly and privately, and that he would not be seen with her in public until he had actually proposed. So it proved to be. The prince and Lady Diana managed to protect their privacy with what the prince later described as military organization. And it was appropriate that one of the first public appearances that the newly engaged couple made together was at Broadlands, the home of Lord Mountbatten in Hampshire, where they were welcomed by Lord Rumsey, Lord Mountbatten's grandson, and by his wife Penelope for the opening of the Mountbatten exhibition there. In retrospect now, the question about the courtship that interests many people is the question, who made the running? On engagement day, Prince Charles was asked at what point he had decided that Lady Diana was the right one for him.
Gradually. And I suppose towards the end of the summer and the autumn last year. And I began to realize, what was going on in my mind and hers in particular. And all these things help. But, it was a gradual business.
Did you find it a very hard decision, Lady Diana?
I had a long time to think about it, because I knew the pressure was on both of us. And it wasn't a difficult decision in the end. It's what I wanted. It's what I want.
I mean, there was a great myth always said about Diana that she was shy Di. It's ludicrous, that. I think it fitted headlines, so editors stuck it in because it went in well. But there's nothing shy about her at all. I mean, I've always maintained that several months before the engagement, long before the Prince of Wales even thought about it, she was pretty certain she was going to end up marrying him, and she organized it beautifully, and she was very cunning. I'm not saying she was devious or anything in it, but she worked him quite simply and knew that she was going to marry him and did it very well indeed.
I think that she perhaps had it in mind longer than anybody realizes that this was a possibility. They met when she was only 16, and it really started in earnest about 3 years later. But it was very interesting how quickly after it became official she was instinctively and suddenly a member of the royal family, and the wave was perfect in a couple of days, and she'd stayed a week or two with the Queen Mother, who I think gave her a kind of crash course in how to be royal.
In the early days of the courtship, when it might be said that she was still pursuing him, he went out to Australia and you were there. How did you observe the effect on him then?
It was fascinating, that, because they were parted for 6 weeks, fairly shortly after the engagement announcement, and it was clear to a lot of people at the time that they perhaps hadn't spent as much time together before getting engaged as most of us have the chance to do. And I think they were still wondering, perhaps, if this was a real love match. Certainly, I think he might have was. And it was noticeable in Australia that he kind of fell in love with her before our very eyes. It was the period when she was becoming an instant worldwide superstar, and this was being relayed to him as to us on television and in the Australian newspapers, and he was like any other consumer, really, although he was talking to her on the phone a couple of times a week. And talk about absence makes the heart grow fonder. One saw him pining away. And also his character was slightly different on that trip.
What would you do to people? And when you then wash it?
Yes, wash it out. It comes out of different colours.
Which might save my fiancée the trouble of taking a hairdresser with her when we go abroad on tours like this one. I dare say they're all practicing Lady Diana haircuts furiously in the background.
I only wish that it had been possible to have brought my fiancée here on this occasion, but it'll have to wait for another time.
He's usually much more approachable and more relaxed out of this country. On that one, he was actually quite distant and quite uptight a lot of the time, and I think it was because he was going through this curious emotional change.
Perhaps observing that if he wasn't falling in love, everybody else almost in the world was, certainly in Britain.
I think it helps in that everybody was saying, gosh, you're a lucky fella, and if he had any doubts at all, they were all washed away very quickly.
Marrying any other well-born young naval officer, she could probably have counted upon a few happy pictures in the social pages. But marrying the heir to the throne of England made her great day an occasion for the whole world, and cameramen came from every corner of the globe to record the event. Celebrants had gathered days before, camping out in the Mall to make sure they were in the very front of the crowds. Thousands of silkworms had been munching for months down in the west of England to produce the new silk for her spectacular dress. The old was some lace which had once belonged to Queen Mary. The borrowed was her tiara, a Spencer family heirloom. And the blue was a tiny bow of ribbon sewn into her waistband with a horseshoe of 18-karat gold sewn in beside it.
Charles Philip Arthur George.
I, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Diana Frances.
Take thee, Diana Frances.
To my wedded wife.
To my wedded wife.
To have and to hold from this day forward.
To have and to hold from this day forward.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse.
For richer, for poorer.
For richer, for poorer.
In sickness and in health.
In sickness and in health.
To love and to cherish.
To love and to cherish.
Till death us do part.
Till death us do part.
According to God's holy law.
According to God's holy law.
And thereto I give thee my troth.
And thereto I give thee my troth.
I, Diana Frances.
I, Diana Frances.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
To have and to hold.
To have and to hold.
From this day forward.
From this day forward.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse.
For richer, for poorer.
For richer, for poorer.
In sickness and in health.
In sickness and in health.
To love and to cherish.
To love and to cherish.
Till death us do part.
Till death us do part.
According to God's holy law.
According to God's holy law.
And thereto I give thee my troth.
And thereto I give thee my troth.
I pronounce that they be man and wife together, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
She distinguished her last unprincessly seconds by muddling up the names of her intended. But that only convinced the 500 million people listening to her that she was indeed a human being, if anyone needed convincing. Outside the palace, crowds pressed against the railings and started to chant for the princess. And it was some deaf viewers watching the scene on television who claimed to lip read as the bride turned to her groom and said, "They want us to kiss." "Why not?" he said. And so they did. Flying off on honeymoon to Gibraltar. The press were there as usual, of course, but the cruise of the Royal Yacht Britannia proved yet another military operation in which the prince and princess triumphantly outmaneuvered their pursuers. The photographers did not catch up with them until they returned to Balmoral in the middle of August. And then, on the banks of the River Dee, where they had first been spotted together less than 12 months previously, the newly married prince and princess posed happily together.
Were they looking forward to moving into their own home in Gloucestershire?
Oh, yeah, obviously. So nice to set up home.
And the princess?
It's just a matter of getting it sorted out, properly decorated. Half the things are in the exhibition in the St. James's.
The princess didn't say an awful lot, but she was asked how she was liking married life. And what did she think of Balmoral?
Have you cooked a breakfast yet?
When Queen Victoria welcomed into her family Princess Alexandra, the great-great-grandmother of Prince Charles and the first modern Princess of Wales to be a truly national figure, she described her as a sweet creature who seems to have come from the skies to help and bless poor mortals. 120 years later, many Britons would use those same words of their latest princess. She lets schoolboys kiss her hand, and she bends to talk to little children standing in the crowds. She is solemn when the occasion calls for it, but no one doubts she has a sense of humor, and people everywhere respond to her charm. Perhaps her greatest triumph has come in Wales, which she visited for the first time in October 1981. Protesters have been busy organizing demonstrations against the intrusion of an English princess, but she disarmed all opposition.
When she came down Church Street, she turned right instead of left, so we didn't even see what she was wearing. What do you feel about that? I feel really upset for my little girl because she follows that all through the newspapers every day. Did she cry? She hadn't stopped crying yet. She had me crying as well.
Loyal crowds jeered at the troublemakers, and for 3 days the people of Wales appeared to experience a collective nervous breakdown as choirs sang, harps tinkled forth, and grown men broke down in tears. In Cardiff, the capital, they gave her the freedom of the city, and in response, she even managed to speak a bit of Welsh.
Well, I now declare that Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales, is now an honorary freedom of the city of Cardiff. May I please present the casket containing the scroll of admission.
I am extremely grateful to you, Lord Mayor, and to the City Council, and to the City of Cardiff, for granting me the freedom of the city. I realise it is a very great honour, and I am most grateful. I would like to try to express my thanks to you in Welsh also. Mae'n blesar cael dod e Gymru, hoffwn ddod eto yn fuan. Diolch yn fawr. I do hope that bore some relationship to what I meant to say, which is basically that it's a very great pleasure for me to come to Wales and to its capital, Cardiff. I look forward to returning many times in the future. And also, I'd like to just add how proud I am to be princess of such a wonderful place, and the Welsh people who are very special to me. Thank you.
She seems to be a princess for all ages. The young idolize her, but so does virtually everyone else. When she attended her first Buckingham Palace garden party as fiancée to the Prince of Wales, she noticed a blind woman in the crowd. So she went over to her and held out her engagement ring so that the blind woman could feel it. In terms of Britain's image abroad, she's the best thing to happen since the Beatles. And when the members of the House of Lords heard that the new Princess of Wales was due to attend the ceremonial opening of Parliament in November 1981, marquises and earls whose existence had almost been forgotten came out of the backwoods to claim their seats for the first time in years. A few days after that ceremony, she went to the Speaker's dinner at the House of Commons. A girl still only 20, invited to eat with the great of the land, and she found herself sitting beside the leader of the Liberal Party, David Steele. "Good gracious," she said, "I wonder why I'm sitting beside you. It must be because I'm so young." Mr. Steele took this as a compliment to his own youthfulness, rather than as a suggestion that he might be getting a little grandfatherly, and they had a very enjoyable dinner together, talking of this and that. At the end of the dinner, Mr. Steele reached out with some pleasure for a big fat cigar that was sitting on the table in front of him, and was just putting it into his mouth with some relish when he suddenly realized, to his horror, that the lady beside him was pregnant and that she might not appreciate heavy tobacco smoke being blown around her. "Oh dear," he said, putting down the cigar with some embarrassment. "Don't worry at all," said the princess, who in fact hates cigarette smoke at the best of times, let alone cigar smoke. And she then picked up the cigar, placed one end firmly in Mr. Steele's mouth, and applied a lighted match to the other. Now, perhaps princesses are not supposed to behave in this fashion, but this one does. It is part of her charm. And we asked all the contributors to this program who know her to give their explanation of what makes up her magic.
She's not a stupid girl by any means. She's got great personality, like our father, who has tremendous personality. He's one of the kindest, nicest men I've ever met in my life, but he's also a tremendously strong personality. And I think that as she gets older, she will develop this Spencer personality, which is very strong.
Well, she has that immediacy that she gets through to people instantly. For some reason, she's got a very open approach to people, and they react. And she's very spontaneous. There's a natural sort of friendliness which comes through. And she obviously likes people.
It's just that she's a sweet, natural person. She's extremely attractive. She's very sexy. She's got a great figure. I think everybody regards her as the perfect girlfriend to have. She's amusing. She's not anybody's idea of a mistress, I don't think. It's the charm in her and the girlfriend attitude and the fact that she's great fun. She has, I mean, another of her great assets is that she can laugh at herself.
The person whose life she has affected most, of course, is Prince Charles. And Michael Barrett asked Anthony Holden just how important she has become in the life of the future king.
Very. I think as he entered his 30s, he was quite a lonely figure. People underestimated that, how many nights of the week he would sit alone in his room in Buckingham Palace, watching the television, eating a simple meal off a tray on his knee with a glass of milk. It was quite a lonely life. But the other thing, and the other thing relates to his choice of a bride, is that unlike many of his predecessors, he wanted this to be a genuinely happy marriage in private as well as in public, very much based on his own parents' very happy family life, which has had a very dominant effect on his own character. And he was looking for somebody who would be very supportive in private as well as in public, who shares his love of children. Both Prince Charles and Diana are well known for their love of children. And I think clearly that that's going to be the case. And he's got a kind of job where a lot of secrets are reposed in him, where he has confidences he needs to share. And he's never quite had the right figure to do that with. It used to be Lord Mountbatten was his great confidant and mentor, and his death left a big hole in Prince Charles's life, which Diana will more than fill in those kind of private roles that a public figure like Prince Charles desperately needs.
So again, unlike some of his predecessors, you would expect him to remain a faithful husband.
Indeed, I don't think we'll be seeing any television series about Lily Langtry-like figures from him. He's quite a religious fellow, and people often underestimate the royal family's religious feelings about their job, and there are many aspects of getting married or having children that Prince Charles regards as his, quote, sacred duty, because it's in the constitution of this country. He will one day be the head of the church. But he's also privately got strong religious beliefs. He spends a lot of time talking privately with people like Cardinal Hume and the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he's not a man who would want to fool around after he got married. He had some fun for 10 years, and now he wants a genuinely strong marriage.
What kind of influence and to what degree do you think she will have on him now?
Well, I think she's already perhaps mellowed him a little bit. Like his mother, she's very worried when he goes steeplechasing, as are we all, because he's not very good at it. He seems to have stopped doing that. That's quite interesting. She reputedly wants to stop him playing polo. I think that's probably be rather difficult because he enjoys that so much. I think possibly she might smarten him up a bit sartorially. He's not a very exciting dresser, and already perhaps his suits are taking on a slightly more streamlined look and slightly more dashing ties, and his hair's getting a bit longer. I think those kind of influences will be very healthy.
When Lady Diana Spencer was interviewed on her engagement day, she said that with Prince Charles beside her, she could not go wrong. Time has already proved that the Prince of Wales could equally say the same of his new princess. The British monarchy is an extraordinary thing. It has been described as a fragile mystery that works, and the Princess of Wales has brought a new twist of her own to its old magic. Young, beautiful, married to a prince and enjoying all the comforts and privileges of a lifestyle that most of us can only dream of, she could easily become the object of envy in a very envious world. But she does not. In almost everyone she meets, she somehow generates love, admiration, and a very warm glow. This is partly, of course, because of her status. Today she is called Your Royal Highness, and one day, in the fullness of time, she will become Your Majesty. But her appeal is more than a matter of titles and snobbery. She has brought something of her own to her new position, a sense of style, a sense of humor, a naturalness and warmth that many people find reminiscent of the British royal family's oldest and best-loved figure, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Perhaps this similarity has something to do with the fact that, like the Queen Mother, the new princess did not grow up in a palace. She was well born, but she started out her life as one of us, not one of them. She spent 20 years reading the newspapers, not appearing in them. And this, of course, made the transformation, when it came, all the more enchanting. The glass slipper was missing, but the younger sister from a broken home did get the magnificent gown, the glass coach, and, of course, the charming prince. As for the magic wand, that was waved by all of us looking on, because we want this girl to carry and keep alive our hopes and dreams and fantasies. There are few enough reasons for celebration in the modern world, but she is one of them. And that is why so many people hope that Diana, Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, may truly live happily ever after.